when I see leaders come under a lot of stress, they often become their own worst enemy. They stop sleeping, getting enough sleep, and taking care of themselves. They stop exercising. And I'm not talking about being a gym junkie or running 10 kilometers a day. I'm talking about just getting enough exercise and fresh air to release the endorphins and to clear the mind and allow your brain to wander a little bit. They often start taking on board more alcohol, which actually can be, the last thing you want to be doing in that situation. And so when you start seeing those patterns of behavior, and of course, the last one I was going to mention is they stop eating well. So if you reverse those, you sort of go, well, what do we need to do? Well, a good night's sleep is truly essential to be able to manage the brain effectively. Eating the right food, it's basic chemistry. Eating the right food in the right way can have an incredible impact on both mental state as well as physical state.
How do you get 10,000 people to take a step to the left? What's behind the relentless mindset of a world champion? Why do teams of exceptional talent fail? How do you manage the pressure to perform? These are just some of the curious questions we will attempt to answer as we bring you world leaders, curious minds, exceptional talent, successful CEOs, and incredible human beings who know how to inspire great leaders and are inspiring great leaders themselves. I am Craig Johns, high performance leadership expert, international speaker, and CEO of Speakers Institute Corporate and World Sport Coach. This is the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong. Welcome to the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast. Our guest today is a visionary leader in the future of work, a professor of the University of New South Wales, the CEO of the Bean Centre, and co-author of the newly released book, Toolkit for Turbulence. Our guest's education includes a Bachelor of Education in Adult Education and Continuing Education at the University of Technology, Sydney, and has an Honorary Doctor of Laws by the University of London. His esteemed career includes General Manager of Worldwide Education Products Group at Microsoft and Vice Chancellor roles at the prestigious The Open University and RMIT. As a mentor for Mentalist, he is also the founder of FutureLean and FutureLearn, and the Bean Centre. I have the privilege of introducing you to a remarkable human who shapes the future of education, empowers individuals, and inspires transformative change on a global scale. Professor Martin Bean, CBE. Martin, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Craig. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation very much.
As someone who's been integral in helping people learn at different stages of their career and life, I'm fascinated. Where did you grow up, and what was the big dream, maybe as you ran around the playgrounds?
What a great question. So I had the great pleasure of sort of time sharing between Victoria and New South Wales when I was growing up. But then I got really lucky, Craig. I finished my last few years of high school from 9 to 12 at a country grammar school in Gippsland in Victoria. And I look back on that time where there was such care from the teachers. The class sizes were small. Nothing was ever impossible. Incredible pastoral care. Just it really did set me up for life. And I think looking back on it probably inspired me around what great education looks like, Craig. And that set me up brilliantly then to go on. So I have a lot to be thankful for from those times at Gippsland Grammar.
So what was it about those teachers that you had during those formative years that made it a great learning experience for you, and that pastoral care? What sort of things would they do in the way that they taught?
Yeah, most people, including my co-author Graham, don't like it when I sort of talk about this, but I have a disability on the right side of my body that everybody forgets after about 5 minutes. But one of the, because each teacher played a different role, but my PE teacher, Laurie Payne, was just one example for you, Craig. He sized me up pretty quickly. He was ex-Royal Navy, a Brit originally. His 2 sons were in my year. And I had all the excuses at year 9 about why I shouldn't participate in PE, Craig. And Laurie wasn't having any of it. But what was wonderful was he just set about figuring out a way that I could do all of the weights and all of the exercises along with the other boys, but customize them to me. And I think looking back on it, it was that notion of inclusivity, but figuring out a way where I could be included, where I would feel like I was achieving something, I was part of the activity, and he allowed me to celebrate the personal best, which is something, Craig, I'm sure in all of your experience, you would know the power of being focused on the personal best, being focused on the others in the group. And if I contrast that to, say, my 2 amazing English teachers who recognized in me that I may not be the best on the cricket field or the footy pitch, but boy, did I have a mouth. And so they got me involved in early stage inter-school debating competitions and public speaking competitions. And Craig, you make a lot more money and get more books in debating and public speaking than you do playing cricket or football, I figured out. But to just recognize within me something that could be nurtured, that again, everybody listening to this podcast will know the ability to communicate, particularly in the workplace, is always in the top 1 or 2 most valued skills. And again, it was because they wanted me to find my niche. They wanted me to excel. They recognized innate talent within me, and they invested that personal time and effort along with my amazing mother to get me to really be able to just excel in my own way, Craig. So there's a few examples, but I'd be interested, what about for you? Who's the most inspiring teacher you had at school and why?
You know, for me, the most inspiring people were those who always made it relevant to my strengths and what I was passionate about. And so for me, you know, it was the math teacher that was able to connect it to real life situations. It wasn't, you know, whether it be sports or whether it be driving a car, whether it be building a house, whether it be, you know, something that was really practically focused in a way. Same with the physics teacher as well. Like everything was around, how do we used all the physics stuff, but used a car and an engine and things like that. So for me, it was practical. The areas I struggled in where it was too abstract, which is quite funny because some of my friends who will listen to me now, like, you always talk in the abstract.
Yes.
You live in the abstract. But for me, I needed teachers that could make it really practical and something that I could apply. And maybe that's why I really struggle with English, is the fact that, you know, a lot of it was around things like Shakespeare or things like that and trying to interpret it. And for me, I've had someone get close to explaining how Shakespeare could be useful in my life, but no one's really been able to put it in practical terms that's made it really, really simple for me. And I think that's the art of teaching, the art of coaching, the art of leading is about simplifying the complexity. And it's so, I mean, as you would know, it's so easy to make this world complex. You know, humans make everything complex, but it's really difficult to make things simple.
Yeah, I agree. And it is that be the ability to connect the theory to the real world is where I believe so much of the learning takes place, Craig. It's where you get that long-term retention. It's where you pick the cliche, the penny drops, the light bulb goes off. But it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, I'm struck by the fact that I often get asked, what's the number one learning platform in the world? Because I'm an educational technologist. And I say to people, it's YouTube. And they look at me strangely and go, what do you mean it's YouTube? And I'm like, well, guess what the number one question is asked in the search engine in YouTube? And people say, well, what? And I go, it's how do I?
Yeah.
The number of people that go to that platform because they've got a need to figure out how to do something, because they have to actually do it right now, and they leverage the learning inside that platform. And I think, again, we can think about really high production video and really high quality and very expensive, but sometimes authentic, just in time, focused on what we need to do can do the job extremely well.
Yeah, how can we make it real world? How can we bring it to life? And I think that's, people are looking for that practical use, whether it's in learning or whether it's even in work. Why am I doing this? Well, what is the practical application of this role or task that I'm doing in the workspace? I think we're really seeing people asking that question, why are we doing this? And people have talked a lot about purpose, but it's not always purpose. It's just, what is the practical realities of what we're doing here?
Yeah, it's why I get so disappointed when in the work that I do through Mentor List as a mentor to chief execs and CXOs, it's why I get disappointed when I run into a dependent culture, Craig, an organization populated by people that honestly don't believe that what they do makes any difference, or what they say. It's such a terrible way to live your life if you don't believe that your personal contribution or the contribution of your team can make any difference. And it's kind of both surprising to me and a little sad how much of that I run into in the work that I do.
But I'm sure you get to see some pretty great examples as well of people who are doing phenomenal things. And we'll touch on that a little bit later on as we go through. For you, what was the first job? What was the first thing you got paid for?
Oh, my goodness. I didn't expect that question. So the very first job I had was working night shift. Actually, no, I take that back. The very first job I had was when I was about 9 years old, doing a paper round in the shopping centre in Sydney, where my mum had a children's clothing store in Cremorne in Sydney. And that was a fantastic paper round because I delivered to all of the shop owners and I got very good tips, Craig. But the first more bigger pay job, because then I did a milk run and did a couple of other things growing up. But the bigger pay job was working the night shift in the Shell petrol station I think it was on the corner of Springervale and Ferntree Gully Road in Melbourne was the first one. And then after that, believe it or not, I drove the blue train at SeaWorld on the Gold Coast, Craig. Not the red train, the blue train. And I can still do the entire script all the way around SeaWorld because some things never leave your brain.
It's interesting when you talk about those different roles. You talk about from doing the paper run inside the, in the shopping center to, working at working at the service station to then, at SeaWorld. A lot of these things, like these roles, require a lot of human interaction and building relationship skills. I was just talking to my nephew. My nephew is someone who's very bright, very intelligent. The last couple of years at school, he got very bored and would just do the bare minimum to get the marks he needed. But he put his drive, and he was talking to me about this. He said, people were always questioning around his work ethic when it came to school. But he said, I was working 100-hour weeks outside of that to raise money to pay for my own intuition. And now that he's just started university, he's in a situation where he said, I've got my friends outside of uni so I can focus in uni. And now this is my place where I work really, really hard. And it was really beautiful to hear that. And he's, dealing with high-end engineering and space type projects, etc. But when it came, I'm going to take this back, right? So someone who's very academic, but he's someone who's done a lot of sport. And also his roles have been in hospitality. Yeah. Now, he could have gone to America. He could have gone to some really big universities, but he just didn't feel like it was the right fit. And so he kind of left everything really late. And he was working in a restaurant and a guy had a NASA t-shirt on, one of those retro ones that quite a few people are wearing now. And he said, oh, that's a great t-shirt. Where did you get that? And the guy goes, well, I actually worked at NASA. And so he started having a conversation, and this guy convinced him that not to go to America, not to go to another school. It was to move to Christchurch, and he wanted to actually mentor him and take him on as an internship in the space world because he could see great possibilities with him. And this guy never met him before, and he literally was able to spot something in him around his ability to communicate from a human level. Now, the reason I share this is there's lots of talk about artificial intelligence, technology, the way that's shaping the workforce. But to me, there's been no more important time than in definitely my lifetime or that I'm aware of, where human intelligence or the ability to connect on a human level is more important.
Yeah, it's so right, Craig. Every year, LinkedIn puts out a study on what are the most in-demand skills in the global workplace. And pretty well, rough math, but pretty well over the last few years, 9 out of the 12 most in-demand skills and competencies by employers throughout the world are actually enduring human capabilities. They're not the technical skills. And the more technologies like generative AI and machine learning permeate the workplace, the more important it's going to be for people to cultivate and nurture those enduring human capabilities. Some people call them soft skills, Craig, which I think is so sad because they're actually the hardest skills to develop and nurture. But it's interesting for me, to your point, that all the data shows that, they are the most in-demand capabilities. And, a lot of the times when I'm working with universities and high schools, I talk to them about what are you doing to not only teach those human skills, but what are you doing to evidence them for the individuals as well? I mean, at high school, I was school captain, I was house captain. We've already talked about the fact that I was a debater, I was a public speaker, I was, I had all of those skills developed, those human skills. What did I leave high school with? A number. That's what I left high school with. A transcript of subjects and numbers. Nothing that described all of those amazing human capabilities that I've developed. So one of the trends that we're seeing now are the rise of these micro-credentials and digital badges that can be conferred by schools and universities and employers that can be shared in LinkedIn or Insta or Facebook, and can be searched because they're searchable and discoverable. And employers are increasingly moving to what's called skills-based hiring, where they're going and looking for those markers of human attributes and skills because that's what they need. That's what they need to move their organizations forward. So I'm very optimistic looking forward that it's almost back to the future, that it's going to be the humanity and what makes us innately human and our ability to interact with other humans and celebrate the human condition that's going to come to the foreground. It'll be all the hack work and stuff that we were never very good at to begin with that will be left to the bots and the algorithms. And of course, we've got to keep up with that. We've got to keep the world safe as we do that. We need to keep an eye to values, ethics, privacy, and security, but it's unstoppable. So let's just get to work and let's celebrate the humanity, and let's make sure that we don't allow the technology to put us in harm's way, is sort of the way that I think about it. I don't know about you, but that's the way I'm viewing sort of where humanity is up to right now.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of skills and a lot of talk around critical thinking and those type of skills where, yes, we've got a machine or technology, but how accurate is the data? Is it actually interpreting what we're doing in an effective way? And there's still, for some and we're a bit blurred. The lines are a bit blurred, really, because a lot of the talk about artificial intelligence in recent times has been around ChatGPT and kind of a search function and being able to generate AI. But there are some amazing artificial intelligences that have created medical discoveries that are doing other sorts of things that have a real high credibility rate and also accuracy rate that are being used for many years already and are constantly growing, that are doing incredible things. So it's like anything, right? Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And so they're even some of those are the decisions that we need our leaders and everyday humans to be cognizant of, and not just going, okay, well, technology's doing it for us. Why do I need to bother?
Yeah, and look, that's the lesson that we learned from the birth of the internet, Craig. Just because we could doesn't mean we should. We were so blind and somewhat naive around the downside of social media, as one example of the internet. And don't get me wrong, social media has done some remarkable things in our lives, and it's sort of the air we breathe for a lot of us. We just that is the way that we connect, we stay in touch, we get our news, we stay informed. But boy, should we have also been paying more attention to some of the downsides of social media and actually allowed our laws, our policies, our frameworks, our education system to keep up so that our citizens could understand, how to discern information from meaningful knowledge, how to be equipped to understand how to protect our privacy and stay in safe spaces. And so let's hope we learned from the internet and the rollout of the internet that we do just need to always be conscious of, as we celebrate the upsides of technology and innovation, we're appropriately looking at what can go wrong and we're risk mitigating. And why I love being part of education is the best way to mitigate risk is by educating people about the pluses and minuses and giving them the tools that they need to make up their own mind with informed understanding of what the positives and negatives are as they head down that pathway.
We've heard a lot of talk around burnout, and it's been a big thing, and for the right reasons. We've seen a lot of people who have naturally just kind of lived with it, or exhaustion, stress, etc., but not really dealt with it. So it's nice that it is up there. But for me, I'm really seeing, especially at a leadership level, I don't think burnout is the big issue. Overwhelm has become the new epidemic in a way, or so to speak, when it comes to leadership, with so much more information. And it's that ability to be able to have a clear mind to make decisions, and as alluding to what we're just talking about there, that ability to really consider the unintended consequences, or if we do this, what else do we need to be aware of? And as the world gets busier and the change happens faster, and the more information that we're getting thrown at us, we've got to really have a discipline of our focus to make sure that we consider what is really important here.
Yeah.
Are you seeing something similar?
Yeah, I sure am. A lot of people describe it as burnout, Craig, but Graham and I, in writing the book, we've sort of looked at it more as people being driven to a defensive mindset. So when people sort of are confronted with a lot of ambiguity, a lot of change, and a lot of unpredictability, which, by the way, is just simply the world we live in, the dust isn't going to settle. They have a tendency to go defensive. And when they do that, they sort of avoid feedback and find themselves reacting rather than responding. They sort of resist change. They start blame shifting, trying to move the blame around. They sort of shut down a little. They become closed-minded, and therefore they lack an openness to discovering and learning. But they also get quite defensive in conflict, Craig. And so we often get asked the question by leaders, so if I self-diagnose, and there's some great reflection activities in the book about whether right now you've been driven defensive because you're overwhelmed, hence the connection with burnout. There's just a few things that we recommend to people to try to get back from being defensive into more of a sort of an adaptive mindset, more of a positive, courageous way. And the first of those is sort of creating or cultivating your own self-awareness, reflect regularly, to make sure that you're aware of those defensive triggers, or go out of your way to seek feedback by trusted mentors about where your blind spots might be. But also, and I'm sure, Craig, you would be seeing this more and more, and I'm so happy about it too, is, really, even for 10 minutes a day, practicing mindfulness, whether that's through meditation, whether that's through journaling. An investment of as little as 10 minutes a day can just really help you with that self-awareness about, have I gone defensive, or am I maintaining, more of that positive, adaptive mindset? The second thing we usually recommend to people, Craig, is really embracing discomfort. It's hard, it can be painful, but it's really the only way to sort of get out of that burnout defensive way. And when people say, well, how do I do that? We sort of say, well, set achievable goals. They can be stretched, they can move you beyond, but make sure, we talked about personal best before, make sure they're not impossible goals. Take some calculated risks, might be volunteering or taking assignments out of your comfort zone. But more than anything, it's about seeking learning opportunities. And, one of the things I love about the rise of podcasts like this, Craig, is they are amazing snippets of learning. And then the final thing we recommend to people if they're in that burnout defensive sort of phase is just don't avoid it. Just confront the challenges head on. Run towards the fire rather than running away from it, and that's all about breaking down complex problems. Take those daunting challenges and break them down into step by step. Don't be scared to reach out and ask for help, seek support. One of the superpowers of modern leaders, I should say, is being vulnerable. It's not having all the answers. It's not trying to have all the answers, but knowing who to turn to say, what should I do? What insights or perspectives do you have for me? But more than anything, when confront challenges, Craig, it's about taking ownership, accepting that, it's on me. And if I make a mistake, I'll learn from that mistake. But if I want to get out of this defensive or burnout mode, I got to be prepared to own it and be courageous, confront the challenge and move forward. So long-winded answer to say, yep, I recognize burnout everywhere. I actually think a lot of it is people have been driven defensive, and a lot of it starts with just that shift in mindset, Craig.
Yeah, interesting. Look, I probably don't want to go too deep on this because I've discussed it in one or two other podcasts, is, being a parent.
Yeah.
And, for me, hard work, not an issue. But and training for Ironman and kind of competing at a high level in endurance sports, hard work is something that you're used to. And I grew up on a farm where dad would work hard, etc. So it's kind of ingrained. Not an issue. Would never get burnout with it. But you throw in sleep deprivation of being a young parent, and I shouldn't say I'm young, being a parent of a young child, it's probably a better way to put it, is something that totally changed my perception on this as well, because I always had lots of control. When I could sense maybe a negative thought coming through, I was aware and I could do something about it. But when I got into sleep deprivation mode, I was aware of it, but I felt incapable of being able to do anything about it. And that's where the proximity of people around me was so, so important. And you're just on that whole time. And even if you're not a parent, if you're someone that is literally on 24/7 and you're not letting yourself get a breather before you go to bed or even when you wake up, you can easily fall into this space of where your brain chemistry starts to shift. And you need to be aware, but sometimes it's too far and you need someone else around you. And it's important to have that proximity of people that aren't just going to be friends and nice to you, and have a good time. They're ones who can really ask those tough questions and say, hey, look, I'm noticing this. You're becoming more negative. You're becoming more cynical. You're seeing the obstacle, not the opportunity. How do we work through this? You need to snap out of this or need to do something, right? You need someone just to kind of go, hey, you know what? I'm there. I'm seeing this as well, to really step out. So that was an interesting situation for me that I hadn't experienced before.
Yeah, and you feel it, don't you, as a parent for the first time, because there is no playbook you get handed. There's no miraculous playbook. Yes, there's a lot of books out there about parenting, but it's not a driver's manual. And then all of a sudden you've got this gorgeous creature in your arms, and anything and everything can happen. And if you don't have that support network, the people that you trust and would trust with the life and care of your child to help you. And as you said, sometimes it's about getting you to step back too and just sort of saying, right, it might feel like the right thing you're doing right now is that, but actually, let me explain to you what the downstream implications of that might look like for you and your beloved child if you sort of stay in that direction. And when you sort of play that out in the workplace, I'm a certified practitioner for a group called Human Synergistics that have some of the most sort of valid psychometric materials on the planet. And one of their thinking styles, Craig, is humanistic encouraging. And there's a really strong correlation between a leader who is strong in humanistic encouraging and their overall performance. And a lot of people think when they read humanistic encouraging that it's always just about me telling you you're doing a great job and everything's fine and just keep it up. But actually, when you dig into the underlying psychology or of the thinking style, it's just as much about the tough love. It's just about being in a positive way. And you've seen this through coaching, being able to pause somebody, put them in a reflective mode, confront them with the evidence and the data, suggest to them other ways that they might be thinking or behaving, but then be ready to support them and coach them through. So it's not always about telling people what it is they want to hear or what they need to do. The flip side of it is, of course, sometimes delivering the uncomfortable feedback that they just need to hear. And of course, you can only do that if you've built a psychologically safe environment where they know that feedback is being delivered with absolute positive intent. And we talk a lot in the book about being the coach your people need. And in being the coach your people need, it's about earning the right to be able to deliver feedback in a constructive and supportive way.
Yeah, interesting. It's just made me kind of think about something around the fact that when it comes to forming habits, right? So we form habits or behaviors that we do, and there's so many people out there that will say it takes 6 weeks to form a habit or whatever. But I have seen it when people in an instant are able to change.
Yeah.
And that habit occurs straight away. Like, it's not a push and pull for a while. Things will happen in life that literally will change that behavior on a dime.
Yep.
And so in regards to, we're talking about these defensive mindsets.
Yes.
And shifting more to an adaptive mindset. Are there, we're talking about obviously having somewhere there that can give you that constructive feedback or maybe hold the mirror up to you in that instance. But are there other ways where it might help people be able to shift the needle a lot quicker when it comes to defensive through to adaptive mindset?
Yeah, I think the first is just really reflecting deeply on what triggers your defensiveness and what are the signs for you personally when you've gone defensive, Craig. So what you described before about people changing on a dime is usually because they've been made aware and then they accept, Craig. So the first step has got to be awareness. So understanding when you have gone defensive and why has got to be the first step. The second step, though, is just embrace the squirm, and we call it in the book. So, and that's about accepting the fact that I'm uncomfortable right now because it's triggered my flight or fight mechanism. And all of my instincts are saying, go security, because that's what we've been wired to do. But what elite athletes and first responders have been trained to do is once they understand they've gone defensive is to compartmentalize, sort of embrace the squirm and then go adaptive. And some of the ways that people can become adaptive, which is about being constructive, courageous and creative, or what we talk about as opportunity thinking, is to be really clear about where you're going. So have that goal about where you're going, run towards the challenges, be prepared to iterate and experiment, because there isn't going to be a yes, no, right, wrong answer. So you've got to be prepared to experiment for yourself and your team. Perhaps one of the most powerful things, Craig, is just expect mistakes and learn from them. I think that is so powerful when you don't fear mistakes, but you're like, well, of course there's going to be mistakes, and provided we learn from them, it's going to be fine. But then a couple of other quick ones, it is about building relationships to make sure that you're getting that feedback that we talked about. But a lot of it is the communication as well. It's about assertively speaking up, being incredibly open to feedback and insights, encouraging alternative views, but as we talked a little bit about before, an intense focus on helping others around you grow. If your mindset is helping others grow, explore, be comfortable making mistakes, then by definition, it puts you into an adaptive mindset, Craig. And I'd be interested to know in all of your work, what you've done when you felt yourself going defensive to sort of bring yourself into adaptiveness. Because in reading all the amazing things you've done, you must have hit defensive on multiple occasions.
Too many to count. Look, it depends on the situation, obviously, context. A lot of the times breathing can shift that state pretty quick. If we're breathing high into our chest and shallow, we're generally tending to switch on our stress receptors, so we create, we restrict ourselves a little bit as well. When we're able to slow it down and take it deep into our belly, into our diaphragm and deep into our belly, then we tend to turn more of the rest receptors, and that's a simplistic way of putting it. And so then we're able to go a bit more calm, and we get out of that fight or flight mode, and we're able to, obviously think clearly about what's going on in that situation. So, I mean, breathing is simple, and people go, oh, breathing, it's a simple thing. Breathing is probably one of the most important and integral high-performing tools you can ever use.
I agree. And in fact, in the book, we actually interviewed about 15 other chief executives and CXOs as we put the book together. We also interviewed this really quite remarkable individual. His name was Kevin Sullivan, who was a Qantas pilot who was piloting a flight from Singapore to Perth, and it had a catastrophic failure of the sensors, Craig, and the plane did what it shouldn't have done. It started hurtling towards the ocean, and Kevin's playbook literally was a ring binder, actually hit the roof of the cockpit and exploded in the cockpit. And when we were talking to him about, and he was an ex-former US Navy fighter pilot, think Top Gun, and we asked him about, well, what was the first thing you did when everything started to go wrong? Of course, what he said, Craig, was all of his training was the very first thing he had to do was to get his own breathing under control. That until he got his own cardiovascular system in the place that it needed to be, he would be suboptimal for everything else that he had to do. And of course, after that, his training kicked in to sort of aviate, navigate, communicate in that order. But I was struck, and I've thought about it a lot, that all of his training was step number one, get your breathing under control. So for our listeners today, when they feel that defensive energy rising, when they feel their skin tingling, that the blood drained from their head to their belly and below, I think that advice you just gave about the very first thing you do is to just get your own breathing and recenter yourself, about the best advice we could have given.
Yeah. Yeah, it's saved me in a lot of situations, but also, that's one for yourself. Once you are able to control your breathing, you control your heart rate, so you lower your pulse, then you get to control the energy of the room. So you control not only yourself, but you control other people around you.
Yeah.
I'm going to use another child example. I remember having my cousin's boy when he was really young, used to have a lot of nightmares when he was sleeping. And so when I was there, I'd take him and I'd bring him over and I'd just put him next to me, and I would gently slow my heart rate and slow my breathing right down and deepen it, which would then bring my heart rate down. And you would see him shift while he was sleeping to calm right down, to then go relaxed state. And you could see he wasn't having, wasn't showing physical signs of being in nightmares anymore. But you don't need to have physical touch to do that. You can control the energy of the room. When people talk about charisma, and when you hear of people being in a room and someone walks into the room that has high gravitas and influence, quite often, I'm not going to say every time, but quite often, their breathing will be really slow and deep and controlled, which means they're in a relaxed, calm state, which has a flow-on effect to everyone else in that room.
Yeah.
And, I can imagine if you're in that situation of that pilot, if the first thing he had done is been vulnerable and shared what the hell he was thinking at that time, that wouldn't have served anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else that I saw practice recently at a big conference in the United States from a dear friend of mine who I used to work with at Microsoft, who's now a senior executive of the company. He, in front of the whole audience, it was probably an audience of 600 or 700 people, started off his keynote address with a thankfulness exercise, Craig. Actually got people to close their eyes and imagine what they wanted to give thanks for in their life, of the people that were helping them, or it could have been anything. It was really just a matter. And so what he combined was breathing with putting people in a meditative state, but then focusing them on thanks, Craig. And it was really interesting to see this was an audience largely of type A salespeople, all ready to get revved up to go conquer the new year. But also with that often comes a lot of cynicism and negative energy. And in that it was probably less than 6-minute exercise that Mitch took everybody through, he fundamentally shifted the mindset of everybody in that room, which meant the messages that he was landing after that, not only would people have retained them a lot longer, they would have gone to a part of their psyche that was a much better place to function from, more of an achievement, self-actualizing, sort of humanistic, encouraging way to approach life. And so, I think, to your point, embracing self-care of body and mind is got to be just one of the critical ingredients of surviving in these turbulent times that we live in. And for everybody listening, there's a lot of tools in the book in the first part around mindset, calibrating your mindset. But it doesn't matter where you go or how you do it. Make it your own. But I wouldn't want to be a senior executive running teams of people right now, Craig, unless I was taking care of my mind and body, because there's only one way to go. And that takes us back to burnout that we talked about before.
Yeah, it's interesting. We deal with a lot of, so I kind of two components of the work I do. We do a lot with people that are speakers and are presenting with influence. And in that space, we find, a lot of people, I suppose the saying is that 90% of people at a funeral would rather be in the casket rather than delivering the eulogy, all right? We have a big fear of public speaking. And a lot of that could go back to what we could teach people in schools to help them, build that muscle before they become an adult. But the biggest thing that we need to shift for a lot of people is to remove themselves from being self-centered. So they all want to serve, but all they're doing is standing there thinking about themselves, right? So they're, they're worried about what people think of them. Are they going to be, is someone going to object and bring them out as a fraud? Or how are they reading? Am I saying the right words? All that type of thing, which is very, very self-centered. I know they want to serve, but they're very self-centered. And the biggest shift for those people is being able to get them into that space where their intention is not about them anymore, but it's about someone else. And as human beings, what I've noticed is that when we shift what we are doing to someone else, and this is this whole gratitude thing, when we shift our attention to someone else, we go into a much calming space where we can have so much more effective influence over others, and our ability to critically think, etc., starts to expand. So we combine that breathing, that meditation you said, with the gratitude, you're now opening up your mind to have a greater awareness, open up to more opportunity, but you're also in a state where you can positively influence people more effectively because your intention is now not about yourself, it's about other people and how can you help.
Yeah, could not agree more. And again, the reason why you see it showing up more and more and more in modern leadership theory and practice is in direct correlation to the rise of mental health challenges in our communities at all ages, at all levels, and it's not going to slow down. The pace of change will be relentless, and it will speed up. And so we need to practice self-care to allow our mind and our bodies to just have the necessary downtime it needs to recuperate and stay adaptive.
So we're talking about self-care here. I mean, from your perspective, what do you think are maybe the 3, 4, 5 key attributes of self-care that anyone listening to this need to take into consideration, not just take into consideration, assess whether they're applying it, and if not, be able to make some shifts to doing more of those?
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I'll answer it. I don't usually do this, but I'll answer it in the negative. When I see leaders come under a lot of stress, they often become their own worst enemy. They stop sleeping, getting enough sleep, and taking care of themselves. They stop exercising. And I'm not talking about being a gym junkie or running 10 kilometers a day. I'm talking about just getting enough exercise and fresh air to release the endorphins and to clear the mind and allow your brain to wander a little bit. They often start taking on board more alcohol, which actually can be, the last thing you want to be doing in that situation. And so when you start seeing those patterns of behavior, and of course, the last one I was going to mention is they stop eating well. So if you reverse those, you sort of go, well, what do we need to do? Well, a good night's sleep is truly essential to be able to manage the brain effectively. Eating the right food, it's basic chemistry. Eating the right food in the right way can have an incredible impact on both mental state as well as physical state. Obviously, being able to regulate chemicals going into your body, whether it's alcohol or other drugs, and being aware of what those chemicals are doing in the state that you're in. But even a 20-minute walk a day in the park in nature, helping you to practice mindfulness. Even better if you add to that things like a little bit of meditation, a little bit of journaling, a little bit of breathing exercises. You sort of put those things together. You've got a recipe, I believe, for being able to maintain body and mind in its condition that it needs to endure and be persistent through the challenges that come at you. And I think if you get yourself in that way, it does trigger more of the eustress rather than the de-stress. The de-stress is the stuff directly linked to cardiovascular disease and the sort of things that go wrong when we're carrying too much of a stress load. If body and mind is in good shape and we learn how to convert the stress into eustress, then it actually can be, quite productive for us and fuel our health and mentality and well-being. So there's a few thoughts for you, Craig.
Yeah, I love those. Now, we've talked a lot about both the self-care and leadership aspect. I'm really curious because you spend a lot of time in this area. And I'm going to take a step back just for a second here. You've worked in some organizations where there are a lot of people. If you think about RMIT, what was it, 80,000 students? How many faculty would have been involved there?
All staff, we were about 5,000 full-time, 5,000 part-time, so about 10,000 staff.
And so that's a lot of people to work with. And we've seen, maybe in our lifetime, probably the biggest shift in the way we work and the way we connect, the way we do things together has totally shifted in the last few years. And that's put a lot of different pressures on people's values, on the way, what we treasure in life, and even how we view different things. Maybe we're even becoming more polarized in our views across the world and the way we see things. For you in your research in the future of how we're working, what are the positives you've seen, and maybe what are the biggest risk factors that you're noticing at the moment that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so well before the pandemic, people had already started to value what was described and is described as work-life balance as pretty darn important, Craig. It showed up in most employee satisfaction surveys as it being in the top 3. People were already craving to be able to get more balance in their life. I think along came the pandemic, and particularly in cities like the one I live in Melbourne, and all of a sudden we were shaken to our very core. We went all the way to the bottom of Maslow's needs hierarchy, and we were worried about our basic and security needs. It's why you couldn't buy any toilet paper, and I'm still eating sausages out of the bottom of the fridge, out of the freezer that we bought as we prepared for COVID, right? It was that natural, instinctive desire to go to some of those most basic security-minded ways of doing things. But the other thing that happens during the pandemic and all of the events that have followed that have really shaken people is we started to dial into more than we ever had before what truly brings us joy in life.
Mm-hmm.
It actually wasn't the great resignation, in my opinion. It was the great reshuffle. People started really questioning what they wanted from life and how did they want that balance to work between life and work. And they got out of roles that they realized were not fulfilling them and went and shuffled themselves into roles that would give them the balance and fulfill them more. Now, what's interesting though, is then what has happened is we've now moved into hybrid ways of working, people exercising more influence and power over where they want to work, how they want to work, why they want to work, partially driven by generations, Gen Zs, millennials, Gen Xs, boomers. But I think that's a cop-out. I think trying to characterize it by generation rather than saying we've all gone through a shared experience of humanity that has shaken us to our core, and now we want to reconstruct our lives in ways where we have that work-life balance. It's giving rise to some really interesting challenges, Craig, to your point around where it's tough. I'm seeing a lot of people really react quite badly at a values level about what they interpret to be shabby behavior about people demanding to work in different ways or not wanting to work on projects that they can't identify with from a mission or cause perspective, or being completely upfront in the first interview about the fact that it had better pay this much and it had better be flexible or I am out of here right now. I'm starting to see these real values clashes and pushbacks. You know, interestingly, some of the toughest people to get back to the workplace have been the late 40 professionals that have done really well because they live in nice homes. They've got great places to work at home. They've worn more Lycra than they ever imagined they would in their lives. And life's pretty good, but we need them back because they're the coaches and mentors for the younger ones coming through. So we're seeing a real set of value clashes. And I think what we all need to be prepared to do is to not impose our historical value structures on what we think of as work and life, but instead go back to being the coach that our people need, embrace every single one of our individuals on our team, dial into their life circumstances and what's important for them, trigger the why and help them understand the why, and then they'll be right with you like never before. But simply through command and control, which we've seen a number of the banks do, saying, you've all got to be back 5 days a week, 9 to 5, recipe for disaster if what you want is your people to really be fulfilled and function at their peak performance. So just a few random thoughts for you, Craig.
I could open up all sorts of different avenues here. Yeah, in the world of work, we're seeing, obviously this stage where people are thinking about, how do I work, where do I work, etc., which is obviously challenging the way we think. But we've got these situations from a culture perspective where people are trying to hold their culture based on what they've always known. Like they had really defined boundaries and clarity around how, in a space that was really quite simple in the way they may have controlled the culture or, the way it would move at a relatively slow space. When we start having people that go beyond just working in the office and being able to see them on a regular basis, that becomes a bit more of a challenge for some of these, not always larger businesses, but some small as well. As leaders, how do we need to shift the way we look at culture? And I know some of the big multinationals should have been doing this for quite a long time, but it'd be interesting to see your thoughts on how do we approach the way we lead culture going forward?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Craig. So my definition of culture in an organizational setting is the collective behaviors of the people in your organization. One of my favorite quotes is from Lewis Carroll, Think Alice in Wonderland, which is, if you don't know where you're going, every road will get you there. I think building a culture in a face-to-face environment or a hybrid environment or a fully online environment has to start with describing through your values what are the behaviors that you want and you're going to reward in your organization. And I absolutely put the word reward in there because it's not having values and describing behaviors can either be an exercise in pleasing the teacher to put in the annual report and then put on a bookshelf, or they can actually be the North Star by which you live your life every day.
Yeah, great.
And if they truly become the way you live your life every day, and if the way that you are evaluated in your performance is the combination of both the technical things that you've been delivered, as well as the way that you've behaved and interacted with others, and if there's a result in that, whether it's a bonus or a promotion or whatever it is, then you can shape culture. But it's got to start with you being able to describe it. It's then got to be able to be measured and rewarded. But I'll let you in on another little secret, Craig, I've learned. And that is, if your leaders don't live it, and if they don't call it out when they see people behaving in ways that are not in line with the culture that you want to build, you will undermine that culture in a heartbeat. For my team, we lived by a mantra at RMIT of what we walked past, we condoned.
Mm-hmm.
So we held ourselves to account that if we saw behaviors in the organization that were not in line with our values and culture, it was on us to call them out. And if we didn't call them out, then that was our problem, and we would get called out on doing that. So I think a lot of people have used, well, we've gone hybrid now, we can't build a positive culture, as a real cop-out, because you can, but it's got to start by going back to Lewis Carroll, know where you're going, know what it is that you want the culture to be.
Now, I know in your book, The Toolkits for Turbulence, you talk about the 5 shares.
Yeah.
Would you be able to delve into that? Why do we need the 5 shares, and what are they about?
Yeah, so the 5 shares are linked to sort of the team building model of align, collaborate, and learn that I won't spend too much time on now. But what I love about the 5 shares, Craig, and people can find it free on our website at toolkitforturbulence.com, is it gives a leader of a team a really practical, pragmatic way with their team to diagnose where are we at right now. It's a fantastic debriefing exercise. And if there's psychological safety in the room, the team will self-identify where their strengths and gaps are. And of course, by understanding where your strengths and gaps are, you can play to your strengths and start focusing on the gaps. And it's a great model. So the 5 shares share the big picture, which is all about a clear and meaningful agreed purpose and vision, and being committed to shared values that we were just talking about, and involving others in the big picture. The second is share the reality, taking shared accountability for the outcomes. And great sporting teams do that, Craig. They don't point at each other on the field, as you know. They take that shared accountability, but they're also open to constructive feedback, and they have great high-quality debates. You know, they relentlessly debrief, and everybody feels like they can talk about what's really going on. The third is sharing the air, acting in ways that builds trust, keeping the lines of communication open, and actively listening to each other. The fourth is all about sharing the load, treating colleagues as equal partners, planning and prioritizing together, Craig, rather than in isolation. But also, one of the things we look for is our team members collaborating away from the formal meetings. That's a really good sign of a team that's sharing the load. And the final one is sharing the wins and losses. It's about paying close attention to overall results, celebrating team wins, and debriefing regularly to learn and adapt. So they're the 5 shares. But for all your Star Wars fans, there is a dark side to the 5 shares, Craig. So for each of them, there is sort of the shadow self or the way of behaving that will undermine the 5 shares. And I'll pause there. You might have a question about the shares, but then if we've got time, I'll dive into the dark side as well.
Now let's hit the dark side, because they all resonate with me and the kind of work we do. So let's go to the dark side.
So the dark side to sharing the big picture is obviously pursuing separate agendas, putting my business unit ahead of the overall outcomes for the organization, thinking and acting at a tactical, not strategic level, or really projecting disunity within the team, sort of, projecting that in. The dark side of sharing the reality is avoid and deny. It's putting a spin on things and lacking cut through, sugarcoating, or not being prepared to admit the truth. It's being defensive or aggressive, playing the person rather than playing the ball. Or it's about avoiding the tough conversations or choices. It's just withdrawing from them and sort of avoiding them entirely. The flip side of sharing the air is all about stifling communication, dismissing alternative views and options, blocking or over-controlling communication. And often you see it show up as a lack of care and respect for the individuals in the team. The flip side of sharing the load is I'm going to protect my own turf. Planning and prioritizing in isolation, making decisions to protect my ego and status and position rather than what's right, or missing opportunities for integration because I'm not really looking for it. In the sporting context, they're the prima donnas, right? They're the people that are wanting to be there for themselves and they're not really thinking for the team. And then the final one, which is the flip side to share the wins and losses, and I see this sadly too often, it's play I win, you lose. Looking to blame others, evading personal accountability as a team or as an individual. And because of that, being really slow to learn and adapt. So what I encourage people to do, Craig, is to print out the 5 shares, put it up on the wall, get every member of the team to rate across the 5 shares, +5 to -5, talk about why, have a fantastic conversation, but then pick from the 5 shares the strengths that the team want to double down on, but also what might be those areas of development that the team self-diagnoses as where they need to spend some time to be a united leadership team, Craig.
I love it. I love it. This is really good. And by the way, you mentioned the ACL earlier. And so for those that want to know more about that, check out Graham Winter's podcast a couple of episodes ago, and you'll be able to really dive in deep to how that connects then to the 5 shares. This has been a cracking interview, but actually more of a conversation. I don't really see this as an interview. It's a podcast conversation. But we all know smart people have great answers, but the most successful people ask great questions. When was the last time you did something for the first time?
Yeah, and great question. I think writing the book with Graham, I'd never written a book with anybody before, Craig, and it's a very, very different journey, a journey that I loved. But you talk about, sort of working and collaborating on something under quite intense, stressful conditions when you've got to publish a deadline to hit. Both of you want it to reflect your life passion, your wisdom, your know-how, but all of those words need to be collaborated on. And I've got to say, working with Graham was an extraordinarily positive experience. And it was my first time, Craig.
I love it. I love it. We all have lots of questions, but I would like to know, what is the one question that you would love to solve?
Look, right now, father of 3 daughters, who I want to go on and live as happy and fulfilled life as I have. For me, it's all about how can we create enough urgency in the minds of our world leaders to really take global warming seriously, Craig, before it's too late. And sadly, if it's not too late already, but there's awareness now. There's even a bit of acceptance now, Craig, going back to what we talked about before. But I just don't think there's enough urgency. So the question that I'd love to be able to solve is how could I just get the world to speed up? Because I honestly believe we've got all the tools at our disposal to fix it or arrest it or begin to reverse it. We're just not working fast enough, Craig.
For you, what is an inspiring great leader, and who is a great example of this for you?
Yeah, so an inspiring great leader to me is somebody that inspires others to act. And the one that is a standout for me, and it was both a privilege as well as a sad day, but I got to attend Nelson Mandela's memorial service in Westminster Abbey In fact, I sat only a few seats away from Desmond Tutu. And as you can imagine, it was a very moving experience, but it was particularly moving for me, Craig, because of his profound belief in education as a powerful tool to sort of to change, to create empowerment, to transform societies, and to really pave a way to a better future. One of my favorite quotes is from him, when he said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And it wasn't just because he had a great speechwriter that wrote that into his speech. When you knew the man and you watched how important education was to him when he was incarcerated and the work that he did afterwards, and how he went on to inspire a nation and the world through his actions. But for me, it particularly resonates because of his deep belief in education.
I love that. I'm actually going to ask a bonus question here. I don't normally do this, but I feel it's appropriate. You've worked with a lot of emerging young talent in with the universities along the way, and also working with different corporates. For someone who is a young, inspiring leader or aspiring leader, what would be one piece of advice as you look to the future of work and the future of where we're heading as humans that they should really consider in regards to developing so that they're prepared for what's next?
So without doubt, number one, we talked a little bit about it earlier, is getting good grades is fantastic, but developing those enduring human capabilities and those very innately human qualities and having the evidence to back it up, that will take you so far, Craig. In university world, we often describe it as the T-shaped graduate. The horizontal are those enduring human capabilities, and you need 1, 2, or 3 of sort of the vertical skill sets to get you going. But it will be those human capabilities that carry you through. And the other thing, if I may, bonus question, bonus answer, find yourself a mentor or a series of mentors that you implicitly trust, because you want that trust to be there so that you listen to all of the feedback they give you, even when sometimes the feedback is uncomfortable to feel.
Bravo, bravo. Look, there's so many gems, so much wisdom here. How can people learn more about what you do, and what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Oh, that's great. So if they'd like to connect with me, you'll find me in LinkedIn. So just simply send me a connection there and we'll get off to the races. If they'd like to understand more about my work, thebeancenter.com will take you to the website. And if you'd like to learn more about the book, including getting access to some wonderful free tools that you can use right away, toolkitforturbulenceoneword.com. And thank you, Craig, for asking. It's terrific to be able to share that with people.
We'll put all those links in the show notes. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, Martin. Your wisdom, your experiences coming right through from when you were young, and the great role models that you had through high school who didn't just put you into kind of a box, so to speak. They challenged you to think differently, challenged you to be more, achieve more, and to look at, I suppose, life from a different perspective, to then that ability to take the knowledge of what we know and consider different ways of doing that. And through your ability to influence or engage a lot of people through the work inside some of your big, the learning institutions that you've worked for, but now a lot with the corporates that you get to deal with, especially at that really high leadership level, who have huge amount of influence over not only people in the way they work, but the way that they may live their life and the fulfillment and joy that may come along. If you didn't catch that, the aspect of joy is a critical component of what we do in life. And we need to have that front and center of mind, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be in our relationships, or whether that be in our personal development and social, activities that we do. I could continue this conversation well into the night and a few more days. And so I really, really appreciate your time coming onto the podcast and sharing some amazing value with our listeners. And I look forward to continuing the conversation soon when I'm down there in Melbourne.
Thank you very much, Craig. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you. And I look forward to connecting with your listeners to explore some of these topics further. Look forward to seeing you in Melbourne soon.
It's time for you to join the Inspiring Great Leaders movement by visiting craigjohns.com.au. Share this podcast on LinkedIn and be sure to hashtag Inspiring Great Leaders. We would love it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a line with your feedback and questions and connect with us on the Craig Johns LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram pages. Be sure to check out the next Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.